Up next, Authentically Detroit welcomes founder and co-host of Detroit is Different, Khary Frazier, to discuss his journey as a creative and what exactly makes Detroit different. But first, this week's Hot Takes in Bridge Detroit. Who wins with new incentives for construction contracts and tax assessment for transparency? Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts right after these messages.
Hey, it's Stephen Henderson from WDET and Bridge Detroit. If you love listening to Orlando and Donna's incisive interviews and conversations on the Authentically Detroit podcast, I hope you'll also listen to the podcast I host, Detroit Today from WDET on Detroit's NPR station. Detroit Today is a daily podcast where I talk with community leaders, elected officials, and residents of Detroit, the region, and the state about politics and the values that animate our communities. Listen to Detroit Today every day on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show.
Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Cass Corridor at the WDET studios. We are a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Donna Givens-Davidson.
And I'm Orlando Bailey.
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for our real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. As you may have noticed, Orlando and I have switched places today, and that's because he's calling in from Atlanta.
That's right. I'm trying to turn it upside down like Keith Lee did just a couple weeks ago.
I know, right? Okay, I don't know if you saw that Orlando does have his own food reviews on Bridge Detroit podcast, but anyway, but he couldn't pass up the opportunity to join today's guest on our podcast. So without further ado, let's welcome founder and co-host of the Detroit is Different podcast, Khary Frazier. Khary, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
What's going on, Donna? Orlando, this is all that Detroit love and family. Peace be.
It is. You know, I think one thing the three of us have in common is our absolute love of the city.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so how was your blessed day finding you this today?
Oh, everything is cool. Everything's cool. In this studio, as they say, and definitely the grind and going. Orlando's in Atlanta, but I'm pretty sure juggling emails and text to the D. You got a laptop and you juggling everything ECN style, professor style, community style. And as much as we love Detroit, we love the black people too. And I'm juggling a bunch of that stuff too.
Oh my goodness, don't we? Don't we? Yes. Well, I mean, that's part of the reason we do love Detroit, right? Yeah. Is because Detroit is us. Detroit is different, and we're going to talk about one of the reasons Detroit is different. But one way Detroit is different.
Chocolate City, baby.
Chocolate City, proud blacks, right? We grew up and without a sense of black inferiority, without a sense of wishing we were different, and you celebrate that so much on your podcast, not without saying it, just by showing it. Sometimes they say, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Definitely.
And you show it as much as you talk about it. And I have to say that hair show you did the other day, I was just flipping through my emails, and I saw these pictures in my email stack, and I was like, wait a minute, that's Nicole. And I looked over and I said, hold on, that's Savannah.
That's Savannah.
Nobody has seen Savannah's hair for a couple of years. And so you had it in the hair show. That is so beautiful. We'll talk about the natural hair show in a minute. But anyway, how was your weekend?
Oh, everything was cool. Just like being in flow, picking up with what's going to happen next. Like, this is that time of the year where I definitely want to get some other stories told. And this is always good to have that platform, but also see what can organize. And family is always going to be big around this time of year too, touching in with the fam and covering that. So it's a little bit of family this weekend, a little bit of work, and some relaxation when it presents itself.
All right.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you, Khary, because I want to talk to you about family a little later on, specifically like who raised you and how did they raise you? Because when I talk about like I was saying this about Tawana Petty, and I think you're in the same category. When I talk about some of my favorite Detroiters, you are always on the list. And I think we share like similar missions in terms of turning over the platform that we're blessed with to, for other people to tell their stories and what they are all about. But I think of you also as not only just a culture creator, but our cultural preservationist, right? The way that you encapsulate our culture in audio, in the show. I mean, he had a collard green cook-off, y'all, and I was there.
That's why I said
I want
in such a palpable way. It's so dope, Khary.
Thank you, and it's like I always say that Authentically Detroit, this is a space and place where you're getting the pulse right now, what's happening of so many things in that space of community, going up the scale to politics, also organizations and nonprofits and foundations, and really where things are being shaped. And in that same pickup, I look for Detroit is Different to be a platform where we can lean into culture, community, and creativity and get some backstories of people, why they're in this space. So it's great. And like I was sharing with Connor, it's like if you can combine both, any guest that's been on both, I would say listen to both podcasts. It's an interesting combination when you get like a context of their backstory and then what's happening and how it really impacts the community.
Yeah, what I love about it is it's us talking about us. Mm-hmm. So many times we're talked about, and talking about us in a way where people walk away with people seeing us as we wish to be seen. Not as, sort of these victims or anything like that, because Detroit is awesome. And I think, the people are, even though we have challenges. And so we always want to uplift our people at the same time that we challenge our government to do a better job. And that's always been a mandate, is do a better job, government, because the government of the United States has never treated us well. Even when we've had good people in power, it's the structures and the institutions that are at fault. So anyway, well, let me tell you about my weekend. I played grandma to both Kylan and Maverick, and then Kevin's son spent the night with us, and we watched Michigan win. It was a little stumbles, but we won. And then we watched the Lions win. A few stumbles, but we won. So it was a good football weekend, good weekend with family.
Grandma Donna.
That's right.
I wish I were in town because I would have been hanging with the parents of Maverick at Friendsgiving if I had been in Detroit. Man, I missed it.
I know, right? I wasn't invited. I was invited to babysit, but it looked
No,
like they had
you are
fun.
not invited.
It's like Friendsgivings exist because grandmas exist. That's what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Another excuse to turn up, and I'm here for it.
All right, but it's time for hot takes. We have so much to talk about, and I want to make sure we get to everything so we can get to you, Khary. But we're going to run down some of this week's top headlines in the city of Detroit, and tomorrow's city council session is going to be hot. And so we're going to talk about two hot takes connected to that. First, who wins with the new incentives for construction contracts, and that's Malachi Barrett from Bridge Detroit. A law meant to ensure more city contracts are ferried towards Detroit-based and headquartered businesses is undergoing changes that could give union construction companies an advantage. Detroit City Council President Mary Sheffield is spearheading an effort to create new incentives for construction contractors that provide health insurance and retirement benefits or participate in registered apprenticeship programs. The ordinance would offer new equalization credits to give qualifying companies a better chance of winning bids for city contracts. Some Detroit small business owners are worried the changes will shift preference towards suburban contractors that work with unions. Charity Dean, president of the Metro Detroit Black Business Alliance, said changes will negatively impact small Black-owned construction firms. Dean said most small businesses can't afford to provide pensions, 401k plans, or apprenticeship programs. She urged the council not to create incentives that will give non-Detroit contractors a leg up over local businesses. The new contracts would only apply to high-impact construction contracts valued at $250,000 or more. And actually, that's changed to valued at $1 million or more based on some recent concessions at the council table last week and today. Other existing credits can be received by Detroit businesses for contracts valued between $25,000 and $2.7 million, depending on the type. The ordinance also proposes requirements for safety training, licensing and certification, and disclosures of past compliance issues. Sheffield said the proposed responsible contracting incentives are meant to improve working conditions on construction sites. For example, she said workers on large construction projects have been found to handle hazardous materials without proper safety precautions. Dean sent Detroit Corporation Counsel Conrad Mallett and council members a letter last week arguing the city failed to follow public outreach requirements. A 2020 ordinance mandates public meetings to be held in neighborhoods affected by initiatives related to construction projects. Dean said the council should hold further discussion on the ordinance until meetings are held in each council district. Dean is also building a coalition to increase engagement with business owners, but she said these efforts met resistance from groups that stand to benefit from the ordinance changes. Dean said one union leader called a member of the Metro Detroit Black Business Alliance and threatened to send union members to job sites. Dean said it feels like an intimidation tactic. Sheffield touts a strong relationship with Detroit unions and has publicly supported collective bargaining efforts amid a wave of labor strikes this year. While Sheffield invoked labor movements in her introduction of the changes, she also emphasized there's no specific preference for union contractors in the ordinance language. This is not about union or non-union, Sheffield said on November 1st. It's about workers. Orlando, what say you?
I'll say this, and I'll keep it brief. I am rooting for Detroit-owned and Detroit-based businesses, specifically Black-owned Detroit-based businesses. And I am against any legislation that will hamper their ability to get city contracts on construction jobs happening in and around the city. If this legislation would give preferential treatment to unionized businesses outside of the city of Detroit that don't look like the city of Detroit, I'm against it. As simple as that. And for unions to use intimidation tactics, I mean, Charity Dean went on record about this, right? So it'd be a travesty if she's lying, but I don't think that she's lying. Because she decided to speak up for her constituency is absolutely unconscionable. That's my take. Donna, what say you?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to be clear about when we talk about unions, what all of this means. Construction unions have a long and dirty history of racial discrimination against Black workers. This is not new. And so when you start talking about unionization and union access, even getting into apprenticeship programs, sometimes there are there are processes that bar many people from getting in. For example, sometimes they have literacy tests and sometimes they have math tests to determine who can become an apprentice and who cannot. And so my question is, what is the racial composition of these apprenticeship programs? What is the racial composition of these unionized shops? And how many of the people in these unionized shops actually live in the city of Detroit? Are we doing something that will help Detroit workers? Or as we drive down the street and we see all of these people working on jobs in the city, how many times do we see people who actually live in this city doing the work? And I think without answering those questions, it's premature to make a decision. Now, I did talk to Mary. I actually wrote a strongly worded letter to Detroit City Council that was read on during the meeting last week on public comment. Thank you. It read on during public comment, and I agreed to remove my letter until I got further information because there were some changes to the law and there were some distinctions and things I didn't quite understand. For example, she's not saying union shops versus non-union shops will benefit. It's just that if non-union shops behave like union shops, and if they have the kind of wealth, these small businesses have the kind of wealth and resources to function like union shops, then they will have the same benefits as union shops. And I think that those are all problematic, questionable decisions. So, one of the assurances during a meeting this morning that somebody gave is, the city council always fights on behalf of Detroit contractors. And I don't know if that's the case because I also heard somebody say that there are only 4 Black contractors that are now qualified to participate in demolition contracting based on new requirements put in place. Now, nobody says Black folks don't need to apply, and these 4 union contractors are doing well, but the smaller contractors cannot compete. And I think let's assess that before moving towards the law.
The other distinction, Donna, real quick, that I want to bring up is that Charity Dean also contends in this article, and to me personally, that there have been no time and space for engagement around this ordinance, right? Going to the public, going to the smaller shops and the bigger shops to engage around some of the benchmarks of this ordinance. And I think that's a grave mistake as well. And I guess I understand Mary's positioning on something like this. but you have to give people time to give feedback. Right?
I mean,
There's been no feedback loop for this.
There is, and we also have to also look at which workers were the ones that were handling asbestos and other things. Were these
That part.
non-unionized workers from non-union shops? Because I know that there's some union shops. There are some larger contractors that had failed to comply. And so this idea that these guys are more responsible than the others, I think that needs to be proven. And that's one of the things that Charity pointed out. I will say that they've agreed to reduce the percentages that to benefit folks based on these agreements to, I think, 3% versus 6%. So they've cut in half the benefit for complying with these ordinances. And they've also increased the dollar amount to $1 million. It would only apply for contracts of only $1 million. What contractors are now asking is that the city delay implementation of this ordinance, if it passes tomorrow, for 6 months or even 12 months, so that the city offices can begin to put in place all of the necessary tools to enforce this. Otherwise, some of the smaller shops are going to be at a disadvantage because the bureaucracy is not yet ready for this. So, Khary, I can see you pointing your finger like, yes, jump in.
Yeah, I agree. I look at this more in the macro and learning of this and just keeping up with the information. But in the macro, we've seen that a lot of these shops that are union will do things that, from what I remember, like the Little Caesars Arena, and they'll just completely ignore hiring Detroiters. So it's not a lot of acts in good faith by some of the shops that I guess we're labeling as union. And then you even brought up like the history of a lot of unions. The history of most unions are they unionized so black people couldn't be up working next to them. So, which necessarily the history does not mean what's happening today, but origins and intentionality do have a whole lot to do with the functionality of something, as we see even in our in America itself. So, as I was saying, yes, you're right. It should allow some running time for some of the small businesses to, I don't want to say to prepare themselves for something like this. Maybe they could collaborate and then also see what type of collaboration are between some of these larger contractors and what could be subcontractors to work together where the money is shared equitably.
You know, one of the things that concerned me today, and I didn't have enough time to dig into this, so we're going to have Charity come back on here, but apparently for construction contracts, you cannot subcontract out that work without getting the city's permission. And so it seems to me as though that's even making it more difficult for some of these smaller groups to get involved. Now, I don't have enough information to demonstrate expertise, but I'll tell you who does know. Charity Dean, because before she started the Metro Detroit Black Business Alliance, she was the director of the Office of Civil Rights for the city of Detroit. In other words, it was her job to oversee enforcement of all civil rights protections. Nobody knows better than Charity, and I think that's why she's so concerned. I don't think we should dismiss her concerns because things can sound good on the one hand. And the final thing I want to say on this is that here we have a city that is still trying to figure out what reparations means, because the reparations task force was never moving along at rapid speed, and then we lost Mama Watson. And when we lost her, it seems like it just disappeared. Mm-hmm. And so here we are talking about reparations on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're talking about enforcing a policy that at the very least feels threatening to black business owners who have been harmed by some of these same practices in the past. And so it feels kind of ironic that coming out of the same office, you got a reparations task force, and also you have this union push. And one of the things that everybody notes is you follow the money. Who is supporting people's campaigns and who is putting pressure on politicians in our city to move forward with unions? This is a great time for unions, and I'm happy about that. But I think that we have to understand the construction industry in particular has been really hard for black people to break into and really succeed. And we're seeing recent gains really threatened. We're going to talk to Khary a little bit.
And that's not a surprise. That's not a surprise, too, even when we talk about Mary Sheffield and her mayoral aspirations and who is financing her campaigns and things like that, right? So I forget which union authored this legislation, but, it applies to all.
Yes. So really, really concerned of ours. And I think that we're going to keep our eyes on this and other legislation.
And here's another point, and maybe Detroit is different and some others could look into this, but also just auditing a lot of the work that some of the unions that are moving forward, how often are they working with subcontractors that are Black and from the city of Detroit? Like, that information needs to be shared just as equitably because they're fighting for fairness and equity. So we should know it should be just as transparent.
You know, I really look forward to partnering with you in 2024 so we can look into some of these things.
A movie.
You know
I
what?
can't wait.
You know, this is going to be a great conversation. But moving on to the next one, Notebook, Tax Assessment Transparency, also by Malachi Barrett. Council President Mary Sheffield spent the year trying to shepherd an ordinance changing the property tax assessment process. A public hearing is scheduled this Tuesday for the final formal session of 2023. Sheffield's proposed ordinance is 2 years in the making, but ran into trouble with city finance officials. Deputy Chief Financial Officer Alvin Horn said there are significant differences to work out between citizen advocates and the administration. There are some portions of it which I believe are in violation of state law, Horn told the City Council on Tuesday. Bernadetta Tuahene is a property tax researcher who became a certified assessor to aid her study of Detroit's assessment shortcomings. She's accused the administration of striking out important language in the ordinance based on faulty legal arguments. And I might also add that she is a law professor and an expert at this. Several residents with the Coalition for Property Tax Justice pushed the City Council to approve the ordinance changes immediately. Sheffield said there's no more room for negotiation between the group and Detroit's Corporation Council. We did get as close as we can on every issue possible, but there's just going to be issues there's disagreement on, Sheffield said. Those that are legal issues, the coalition has provided case law to counter it. Sheffield's ordinance aims to bring more transparency to property tax assessments and give the council a role in recommending appeals to the city's Board of Review. City attorneys argue state law requires appeals to be filed by groups that have an interest in the property, which doesn't apply to the council. The ordinance will create a 3-member task force responsible for reviewing sales data and creating an annual study. The independent evaluator would help the council identify properties for review. The proposed ordinance will require the release of information used to determine the value of property, make changes to the appeals process, and require the city to reappraise all residential property every 5 years. Horn said assessment notices for 2024 must be mailed the first week in January. Any changes approved now would make it impossible to deliver the notices on time, he said. The calendar is not our friend, Horn said. If decisions are made next week, it's literally too late. What do you say, Orlando?
I say that the mayoral administration makes time for and creates runarounds for things that are of importance to them and that are politically expedient for them. I mean, i.e. this land value tax that the mayor is trying to get passed in Lansing. Listen, if Yodit Mesfin-Johnston was here, she would say we've been treating the fish when the water is sick. And what we have in the city of Detroit is this developed affinity for demolition. But what feeds this need to demolish blighted and dilapidated homes and structures, right? And we can point to the fact that so many people lose their homes to property tax foreclosure. At the height of this epidemic, about a third of Detroit's home ownership rate was lost because of the property tax foreclosure crisis. Yeah. And so this ordinance is seeking to revamp the way we do assessments. This ordinance is also seeking to revamp the way that we appeal our assessments and for how people should be able to represent themselves or be represented by an advocate, making it easier for the citizenry to stay in their homes. Yeah. And so City Council formal session is going to be an interesting one. I know that there is a coalition of the willing on council. Will that be enough? That remains yet to be seen. The mayor has proven to be very persuasive when he's not for certain kinds of legislation to pass and people vote.
This would be
according to,
So listen,
interesting.
Orlando, I'm going to have to play you for a minute and take our first break. Let's pick this back up in a minute.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the East Side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, by Detroiters, for Detroiters.
And we are back with conversations about this transparency in Texas. And Orlando, you were going into a great deal of detail about some of the issues with the existing property tax law, how it's being implemented, and why this is important. Can you continue that conversation?
Yeah, I can continue it. I absolutely got to say that I also love being on this side. Donna had to cut me off. She knows what it's like now. But what's also having, especially Donna, I'll say this: my work at ECN was part of my work at ECN was helping folks apply for property tax exemptions. For folks who are living in poverty, they are exempt from being able to have to pay taxes if they can prove the hardship. But that is something that has to be applied for every single year. It makes it so very difficult for folks. You have to have a notary. You have to have all of these kinds of things to be considered to get your property taxes exempt, right? And so I think to the extent that the coalition and Dr. Professor Bernadette Atuene has had their ear to the ground and has helped usher in, number one, education about this issue, but also reform on this issue is a good thing. It's going to be a contentious meeting at the formal session, and I'm going to be glued in.
Yeah. Listen, Bernadette Atuene's article, or law review paper, Predatory Cities should be required reading for every public official in Detroit. It's absolutely brilliant at the way she breaks down the areas of concern. The thing to keep in mind also is the $600 million in overtaxation that has already taken place. When the city says, and my understanding is our corporation counsel has threatened to file an injunction to stop this because somehow it's in violation of the law. And so, he's an attorney, but so is Dr. Atuene, and she has access to other attorneys, and they've actually given a legal response to that. Our community is pushing for it. We believe that it is absolutely as important to make sure that Detroiters' property taxes are fair as it is to make sure that the Illiches don't have to pay property taxes, okay? As it is to make sure that we can, stimulate businesses and do all of these other things to the entities that seem to always be a priority for this city. It was really a concern of mine that there's so little publicity about this law. And so I'm hoping also that we can do a better job of pushing this information forward so that it can get its proper vetting. This has been underway in the community development circles since, August of this year. We need to do a better job making sure that we're contacting Bridge Detroit and Outlier Media and the Detroit Free Press and News and Cranes so that they can cover this as equitably as they're covering this land value tax that the mayor prioritizes. Anything?
I also want to say that just like this ordinance is being sponsored by City Council President Mary Sheffield. Talk about duality here.
Yes, absolutely. And this evening when I leave here, just to be clear, we're going to have a conversation at ECN about race equity in Detroit with a focus on city council and also the city council boundaries because those are changing. And so, when I criticize our public officials, it's not personal. They're doing a job. And whatever job they think they need to do, it is our job as citizens to hold them accountable because whoever is in office has to understand that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you have a city with weak democracy like Detroit, it makes it possible for policies and laws to pass without really addressing the needs of the people who are actually voting people into office because so many voters have become disengaged from the process. Khary, you want to jump in?
I just want to add, and this is how people are sleeping at the wheel, we're $600 million, and that's only what could be accounted for in that time.
That's right.
So it's no telling how many people in neighborhoods such as my own and and other neighborhoods where people lost their whole home, and you can't even quantify the value of that, the intrinsic value or the actual material value of what that is. So what happens when these things happen, because people are already in conditions of poverty, which, you know, you're going to have limited time to address and be present. And then you look up and deal with $600 million and basically an executive body's response, as far as I'm concerned, is my bad. Like it's no accountability, and then overzealous towards new taxations and changing things around. And it's like, can we address the challenge that never was addressed and the elephant in the room before we move forward, which that's where many of my neighbors and the people, you know, around Dexter, 12th Street and Linwood, the first thing they're going to say is, my people lost their house from overtaxation before. So how do we deal with that?
Imagine a city where nobody lost their homes, and imagine the census after that, right? We lost population, and people lost homes, and we don't even want to see it's correlated, right? Imagine a city that said it's as important to keep these people in their homes, and we are going to not enforce these tax foreclosure rules, which of course are voluntary. Every municipality doesn't have to do it. We're not going to do that because we want to keep people here. Instead, we have a city that says, well, it's not fair for us to not take people's homes, and some people do pay their taxes, as though there's anybody in the city of Detroit who wants to see their neighbor's home snatched and wants to see their own homes lose value, as house after house after house on their block and around the block from them, you know, is taken by the tax man. And the people who are replaced in those are never going to have the same duty of care, the same love of the home. So it's politics. I think people can say, well, it's to the city's benefit to give tax breaks to the Illiches. I say it's to the city's benefit to figure out how to enact fair taxations to poor folks who are leaving the city because they can't afford to stay. And with that, I want to talk about Detroit is different because, you know, that's a lot of frustration that I think a lot of us have politically. But one thing I love about Detroit is different is that you're celebrating Detroiters, our history and our culture. So can you talk about how you got started with this?
Well, actually, the vision came about as a platform for some of my music at the time in 2014. I was like, I want to talk to people in a blog form, and I'm liking podcasts, and I was one of the big fans of podcasts early, like around 2010 I began listening. And at that point, I said, let's do a platform for both, because people are always saying I got a big mouth. I'm always on a soapbox. So let me create a soapbox. That's Detroit is different. And since then, just a journey of redefining what that is. And I found, like I say, community, culture, creativity, and a platform for access inside a neighborhood, inside a real Detroit neighborhood. As you're talking about, one of those communities impacted is where Detroit is different is recorded. And many times people pull up and say, wow, you got all this equipment here and you're not afraid. I'm like, this is where I'm from. This is a true reflection of what my community is and what Detroit is. So
I cannot wait
Detroit
to
is
visit
different.
you. I cannot wait to visit you. So, you know, that's interesting that you got started that way, because Authentically Detroit also got started because Orlando and I have big mouths. And we were like, hey, let's try podcasting. We were just 5 years behind you.
Yeah.
Right?
And came right behind. I remember Orlando. I was like, yeah, y'all doing something dope. Like, probably I was like one of the first listeners. I was like, okay, this is where I'm not going, because I'm really like on the pulse of what's current and really getting. And now it's like, as the history over those 5 years, I can kind of go back to like when a project started and get their interview on Authentically Detroit when, I don't want to say rose-colored eyes, glasses, but like hearing a person's perspective before they really start engaging the community, and then seeing them as their journey picks up. It's been very defining, and I want to thank both of you all for that, because now I can go back and say, okay, they're learning more of what Detroit is and how you really have to be sincere, because Detroiters ain't going to rock with you unless you really are for what you're doing.
Oh.
Here's the title, you know, Authentically Detroit. But, Khary, I want to talk about you in this podcast. So the Detroit is Different podcast is about exposing artistry, business, ideas, and dynamic people, places, and things that make Detroit a mecca. It's hosted by you, using your experience in art and culture to open up discussions It's a showcase of true stories from people shaping the culture of an American city. And my question to you is this: where did this proclivity come from, Khary Frazier? Who raised you to think like this?
Okay, so you hit me with a Detroit is different question. So my mother, rest in peace, Jan Frazier. My mom was the first child of the maternal side born here in the city of Detroit, of my grandmother, where the home that my grandfather, John Brown, and Mary Lee Brown, where the home they bought on Clements is where Detroit is different. That's the incubator space.
Wow.
And my mom being born there in that neighborhood on Clements Central, graduated in '67, almost like, walking off the stage of her graduation, and like about a couple weeks later, everything changes in that community when we think of the rebellion in '67. So my mom, an entrepreneur, ran Jan's Flowers, also very ingratiated in so many community movements. A very good friend to Joanne Watson, rest in peace. Really good friend to Sharon McPhail, and worked with Sharon. That's almost like an auntie to me. But also Mother Helen Moore and other initiatives in the Keep the Vote No Takeover movement. That was big for my parents. So that's one side of me, and really in community and care and concern. And then my dad, Greg Frazier. My dad comes from Cincinnati, moved to Detroit in the 70s. To pursue working with, I don't know if people know this, but Unisys, and then General Motors as well, and sparked out on his own as a CPA. So always seeing this groundswell of what entrepreneurship looks like my whole life. And then that balance of community and creativity of my mom, that combination of my father and my mother are really a good balance of me and the extensions of their networks, and learning how to engage in community and being grounded there. That's the foundation of my parents. But I would say my grandma, Mary Lee Brown, played a big role in my shape up. As Donna was saying, like, grandma is it's more than free babysitting. It's actually how you raise them kids with some good lessons. You know what I'm saying? So Mary Lee Brown was a social worker. When she did work, she worked for a series of Catholic and Presbyterian churches as a social worker. And this is a different era in social work where churches played stronger roles in communities. Her journeys in so much of the work in social work actually had her cross paths with two huge figures in Detroit history, and one I had no idea who he was, but until after he passed. And one was Reverend Milton Henry of Christ Presbyterian Church. So as Milton Henry was transitioning in his work as Gaeti Obadeli and leading the Republic of New Africa, and looking to transition to faith as a space to teach for our people and care for our people and be present in community, he was always with my grandma, Mary Lee Brown, as the music director. And I saw them start a church as my sister and I, my big sister Dar, we would be handing candy out to these different senior citizens amongst those senior buildings up and down Jefferson. I'd say probably from Belle Isle, so like East Grand Boulevard, all the way to, let's say, Van Dyke. Most of those senior centers, we would go and offer church sermons. Well, he would give church sermons. Me and my sister would give out candy. My grandma would play the piano. And then I saw them develop in that form of community organizing. But these are my origins.
Well, your origins are really exciting. I can't wait to hear more about them. And I want to hear about your music before we forget to move on. But we're going to have to take another break and then come back with those stories.
Have you always dreamed of being on the airwaves? Well, the Detroit Eastside Engaged Podcast Network, or DEEP for short, is here to make that dream a reality. Located inside the Stoudemire, the DEEP Network offers studio space and production staff to help get your podcast idea off the ground. Doesn't take a whole lot of work to get started. Just visit the Authentically Detroit page at ecn-detroit.org or call Sarah at 313-948-0344.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the Neighborhood Tech Hub, and more. Members who are residents of the East Side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
And we are coming back. So, Khary, I didn't know about your history as a musician. Mm-hmm. You know, over the weekend, I was listening to Andre 3000's transition from rap to the flute, but really this new age kind of jazz music that kind of is relaxing. I've been to sound healing, and it kind of, evoked all of that for me. I was working on a project on a deadline. I was really deep into my meditative state, but you went from music, and I don't know what kind of music, to podcasting. Are you still doing music?
A lot less, but that's where a lot of my ties also kind of come from, but hip hop. So you can look up my music. Some of it's on Spotify. The last project I did, 2015, If Detroit Were Heaven, and it's some cool stuff. I mean, different ideas. I love the platform of what hip hop is and what it is. Probably one of my favorite art forms, but podcasting I find more connected to some of the stories I want to tell and get more information out. But I do see some music possibly coming because people are always asking, especially with this 50th anniversary of hip hop.
You also do so in a way that literally invokes hip hop. I don't know if anybody has told you this, but whenever I talk to you, Khary, or whenever I hear Khary's voice, the rhythm in his speech, if it's not hip hop, I don't know what is, right? I'm serious. Just the way
I take that as a compliment.
Yourself.
I take that as a compliment.
Man, for real.
I love the hip hop stuff.
And I think that If Detroit Was Heaven, I can't wait to listen to that. I mean, that sounds like it's my, because sometimes hip hop, it has become narrowed into something that it was not intended to be. Mm-hmm. And in the storytelling and the, sort of message rap and all of that gets lost in the sauce. Do you have a balance between sort of telling the stories? What kind of stories do you tell in the different,
Well, even that journey creatively, I think that it began with just liking rap and figuring out what to do. And then as time went on, things became a lot more refined and like, okay, let me give voice to some different stories. And uniquely, when I walked in, kind of was like, yo, whether you ever been in here? And I was thinking to myself, like, one of the times I performed in this studio, one of the songs that connected most to people, I had a song called Teddy Bears Tied Up to Trees for tragically when a child is murdered in a crossfire. And that song, when I created that song, I didn't think it would connect the way it connected.
Can you give us a few bars? Or?
So I see a teddy bear tied up to a tree. I have to stop for a moment just to sit and think. When a kid gets shot, this is memory, and this is just what the family thinks. So that's like a couple bars of it. But it's a deeper song, and that song opened me up to saying, like, okay, people are paying more attention depending upon even if I go more personal. So more personal will be introducing them to different ideas. Like If Detroit Were Heaven, I'm just painting a picture of, like, I say, like, when Coleman Young welcome you up at the front gates, Irma Henderson would take you to where children play and things like that. Like, let's play around and let's introduce new ideas through music and expression.
So we are going to, at ECN, learn more about your music because it sounds amazing. And I love the way that you give expression of things that really matter to Detroiters because it seems like it's a reflection back. Mm-hmm. So I have some questions about you, about your past. We talked about it a little bit before we started. When I listen to your show, first of all, it seems like you know everybody.
Hilarious.
Like you are like old Detroit. And because whenever you talk to people, there's always this personal relationship. That's what I love about it. It's never like you don't talk to strangers, right? Mm-hmm.
I sometimes I'm open to it. Like I say, I feel that similar to this platform in the sense of, and we've even had that discussion, I'm open to talk to whomever. And I feel like using Detroit as the highway to tell the story. And as you start talking Detroit, it's going to be something in my mind that pings. Just because I've been here for so long.
Well, but still nobody seems like a stranger as you're interviewing them. And
That's a gift. That's your gift.
Yes,
Khary.
it is. It's an
Thank you.
absolute gift. Orlando has that same gift, right? You
Oh, yeah.
make people your friends. You make people feel as though you're connecting to them on a personal level. And you have so many Detroit stories. And, you know, I always think I can tell people who were at least partly raised by their grandmothers. You know,
Oh yeah.
I see it in you and Orlando. I'm not trying to be funny, but it's the truth. You can tell
For sure.
grandmothers put an imprint on their children. Hopefully I can have that impact on mine, because you can always tell.
It will be there. It will be there. Now, they may not necessarily miss the Georgia pecans in season like I do, but it'll be their own iteration of, like, they'll be picking up a flute album and they'll be like, oh yeah, grandma used to be jamming to this.
But you know, Detroit has so much history. I mean, you know, Milton Henry, you know, I've been reading about him recently, and the Republic of New Africa, and certainly what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi. We see it connected. What is the impact of these historical Detroit institutions and other institutions that you've been connected to your political consciousness and your thinking? How do they put their imprint on you?
Well, definitely, I believe the Afrocentricity comes strong through the lens of my parents first. Even my name, Khary. This was a time, I'm born in 82, so a time where African and Black consciousness is more along the pulse of a lot of things in society itself. So the imprint that it leaves on me is, like, I've been hearing these stories from people like my late godmother, Joanne Watson, of like, oh, well, this was blackness over here, and you could get shea butter there, and, you know, dashikis were sold there, and the Shrine of Black Madonna had people in the streets with buckets where the children were dressed in their garb of red, black, and green, and people just knew to drop some money in the bucket because you were supporting what the shrine was doing. Like, I hear these stories and I say to myself, okay, that consciousness is still here. It's just how are we going to organize it? Because we're not necessarily seeing the institutional strength throughout a lot of what anchors. As one of the discussions I often have with my dad is, I believe that the Black excellence that manifested in Detroit at one point, definitely we think the 70s, the 80s, and a little bit of the 90s, we took for granted the beauty of what we had and started, I think, in certain ways, I don't want to say infighting, but not necessarily knowing the way it would be coveted and the slick ways that others would co-opt the Black excellence that once existed in Detroit in these positions through the ignorance of not knowing what would happen. But the Aisha Shule as a school was one of the key institutions. Mami Imani Humphrey, shout out to her, rest in peace, to build a African-centered school. Her being also the writer of the First Fruits book for Kwanzaa, which really put Kwanzaa into a practical space for it to be celebrated for people. But even knowing more of her backstory of she was a teacher at Eastern High School that became King High School at the time, and she, in that transition before it became King High School or Northeastern, you know, teaching a lot of the students that were demanding Black history to be in schools. And she lost her certificate as a teacher as she was fighting to advocate for the students to have Black history in schools. And it's so unique, as they say, history will repeat itself if what's happening in Florida and really throughout our nation about Black history being present. So I've always been in this space of consciousness from school, from my parents, and so many other things of enlightenment about what being Black is, what Black history represents, and how I always knew the stories of Hannibal. I always knew the stories of Fannie Lou Hamer. I always knew the stories of Marcus Garvey. So this is my indoctrination as a child. Right. So I never necessarily was thinking to myself, like, because I'm Black, I cannot do it. I was always thinking, because I'm Black, not only do I have to do it, but I have to do it at a more exceptional level than anyone else, because that's the standard of what Blackness is.
Oh, that's amazing. I want to say a couple things. First of all, the term Black excellence actually gives me, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard right now because of the way it has been repurposed to describe something very different than what you're talking about in Detroit. Because it was communal excellence. It was collective excellence. It was inclusive excellence. And right now, Black excellence is going to an Ivy League school and being better than other people. And it feels like just the opposite. It feels as though Black excellence is assimilation and not community building. And so I appreciate you using the term in that framework so that I can actually hear it and not cringe. The other thing I think about is schools like Aisha Shule and Nataki Taliba Schoolhouse and Insuroma Institute, all were impacted by the charter school movement.
Definitely.
Which, first of all, because these were affordable private schools where parents used their dollars, and then all of a sudden parents had these options of sending their kids to charter schools, and charter schools impose a certain level of logic that says, okay, it's more important that we do rote memorization of these things and learn things in this manner. And when the intellectual freedom was compromised by the charter school movement, it seems as though the schools themselves no longer excelled in the way they had to produce leaders like you. Would you agree with that?
I would say and I definitely agree with you on the Black excellence. It's similar to hip hop. Like when things become a commodity for the market, sometimes it doesn't necessarily hold well for Black folks, usually, traditionally. But similar to what happened in that movement of African-centered schools, I'm going to use the analogy from the I'm Gonna Get You Sucker movie where it's like the brothers went in with guns and they came out with jobs. Like as sometimes we have no idea what may happen as we start walking a different path of, I don't want to say compromise, but like just it's not as independent. What you're going to forego, the opportunity costs of losing your independence and being a part of systems.
Well, you look at the No Child Left Behind law, right? No Child Left Behind was supposed to put a certified teacher in every classroom and improve academic outcomes. Academic outcomes actually declined for Black students, and the achievement gaps widened. Why? Because we had a whole lot of people who were teaching Black students who were not certified by the state, but who were doing an excellent job teaching. And, with certifications, you can't just be a certified teacher. You have to be certified, then you have to be specialized, and you have to constantly pay money into education systems to maintain your certification, which is really great for schools of education, but it's not great for teacher diversity. And so now we have fewer Black teachers, fewer Black schools because the state has taken over. Now, if you really read the history books, the Panther schools in California were doing it, right? They were actually, those students were outperforming other students on standardized tests. But when we become part of a state system, which is segregated and unequal in all ways, then all of a sudden we find that these schools are no longer thriving. And so all of the schools that we've talked about, are, is Aisha Shule still open?
The only African-centered school of that, when we think of Mama Imani and we think of Mama Mosa Bailey and many of them is Timbuktu, that's now the Barack Obama Academy. But even with the transition of Barack Obama Academy, is going to shift in some of the focus. So I would say that movement of what became of African-centered schools has completely shifted. And now some of the, I guess, the graduates such as myself, we knew the value. We know what that value is, but even us organizing what that movement looks like and what that connects to, I'm unaware of how that's going to organize. Greg McKenzie at Al-Kibalan Village has been leading an initiative with some others to look for organizing another African-centered school for the children, or they say the Watoto.
Well, because, as a grandmother, of course, these are things I look at. Now, my granddaughter is at Marcus Garvey Academy, and they do incorporate many things into Marcus Garvey, I have to say. I'm really happy about that. But even, African dress, the all of the hallways are named after famous African-American people, so they do incorporate some things in there. But I don't think the academic freedom is there because it is a public school, and there is a state-mandated curriculum that really narrows your opportunity to do what you wish you could do with student education.
Very much so. I mean, even in a lot of that litmus test, even in public education, what's happened, because it's become so formalized, like almost like it's a process more so than you're speaking to who the student is individually, who exists in this community specifically. What's the culture here? That's the value that I believe it's just not present like it once was. So some of the lessons, some of the personalities of the teacher, like I remember, it would be days, Mama Titi Laya, shout out at Aisha Shule, we would sit and we would unpack like in what would be the second grade Bob Marley lyrics, like, and really that be a part of the lesson, and having an understanding of the socioeconomic, political challenges of Jamaica through lyrics. Like, this is not gonna probably be a lesson that's a part of the pacing chart to be on the lesson plan of what's happening in a state-funded institution.
Yeah, I look forward to having conversations with you and others about how I can contribute to that. I feel very passionately about the fact that we need to stimulate learning, that we need to try new ways of teaching our young people. Right now, learning is hyper-competitive, and Orlando and I just had an opportunity to interview some folks and talk about technology and education. It was, what's the name of the organization, Orlando?
CS4 Detroit. CS4 Detroit.
CS4
in the
Detroit.
Cape Horus Center, sponsored by the Cape Horus Center.
Yes.
Yep.
And so it was a great conversation about, integrating technology and computerized skills into the educational process, not to necessarily produce, computer professionals, but to really whole people, develop whole people. So it was an exciting thing. What do you see as the possibilities for Eastside Community Network and Authentically Detroit? Authentically Detroit and Detroit is Different working together in 2024?
I think that you've already pitched a little bit of what we're going to do, but it's definitely going to involve community involvement. And that's where the pulse where I want to connect. It's going to be with the people of the people. I mean, ECN already stands as such a hub for people to connect to. And what it represents for people to know, and now expanding into a healthcare center, and where people can track that and still get the rest of the information. Your child can engage with ECN, the senior can engage with ECN, the whole family needs to be in there to get healthy, and those initiatives. I think that that's very fascinating with Detroit is Different, because like I say, I really like engaging with the culture and the pulse of the people, and that's what is happening with ECN. And then Authentically Detroit, like I say, just to really challenge, and now I'm thinking, because we're getting so much data and information statistically of what's happening in and around Detroit. A lot of people are in that pulse, and hats off to those working in there. But now let's talk about the rich content. Like, how is it connecting to the people? Why does it seem so many people have checked out from some of these systems, and why is it not speaking to them? And I believe we can explore that. And I definitely know that, as Donna's saying, I think that's going to be the street we drive down. What is it that people are looking to where they're not feeling heard, they're not being seen, and they're not feeling a part of?
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you my dream. And I want to hear Orlando's. My dream is that we can bring some of the fun stuff you do, the collard green cook-off, the hair shows, because, we're people of culture. And people don't always have to come together for serious stuff. Sometimes you can bring people to a room for something they enjoy, and then incorporate other messages, incorporate other information, so that you do balance, right? But my dream is that we can do all of that so that we can have holistic activities across the city of Detroit. Hearing people, celebrating with people, uplifting our culture, uplifting our pride, helping us feel good about ourselves. Because one thing I can say about African-centered education, among many other things, is it helps you have a good self-concept as a Black person, right? I had only 1 year of African-centered education, and that was in second grade. Now, mind you, I was born in 1963, so it was a while ago. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Griffith, used to have us unpacking lyrics like Lean on Me, by Bill Withers. We would sit there and we talk about what does it mean to be your brother's keeper. We learned the Black National Anthem, and we talked about Black thought in second grade. And that was the only time I had it, but it really changed me forever. And so I'm just thinking that trying to imbue that kind of pride in the communities that we visit together would just be transformative.
Oh, I'm definitely for that. I mean, it being culture, it's a lot of ideas because a lot of the Detroit is Different ideas are like the collard green cook-off for My Natural Hair Show. Like, I want to get in the nooks and crannies of Black culture that I don't think a lot of other people find like what would be that platform, but that's my event. That's what I liked about it. Even when Orlando came, it was still there. Like, to create an event where you and your grandma really want to be there at the same time, you don't feel like, oh, my grandma dragged me out here, you know, or anything else. So one of the things, like the idea, we haven't done it yet, but working with, and I love comedians and entertainers, but Coco is almost like a godmom to me. But I want to do a family fashion show. So something like that would be cool, where like the whole family gets to do something cool in fashion to represent, because these segmented journeys where it's just the youngest or the oldest or the people in the middle, it's not the community that's reflective, and I want to tap into more community.
Yeah, the village, right? That's what makes us strong, and we are being torn apart right now. Old versus young. We don't trust each other. We don't talk to each other. That's super exciting. What say you, Orlando?
I say that I would love for us to create a space where Black people feel seen, heard, and understood, loved, and cared for in all of our complexity, in all of our triumphs, in all of our pensive moments, and all of our problematic moments too, right? I also would like to say I want us, again, and I say this all the time, I want to make it impossible for us to be misremembered or disregarded by building a repository of content that says we are here, we were here, and we led while we were here, right? For generations to come, Khary's grandson will be able to hear Khary's voice and see Khary's face and see the values that he espoused. And what does that do? That would embolden the next generation to be proud of the stock that resides on the inside of us. Every time I uncover something new about my ancestry, something new about my family, it emboldens me and gives me a more tenacious tenacity to keep going and to build upon that legacy. And my vision for us is to create, once again, these platforms, to give them away. Let's turn these platforms over. There are so many people who have amazing stories beyond us, beside us. There are so many amazing griots that need their stories surfaced by our various platforms. And so I cannot wait to work with Khary Frazier. Yeah. You're doing it. We're doing it. And for us to come together and do some stuff together, it's going to be monumental. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Stronger together. If you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. All right. Now it's time for shout-outs. Let's start with you, Orlando. Do you have any shout-outs?
I would like to shout out Ms. Marsha Morrow. She's one of my best friends' mother, who just turned 70. We were here for her 70th birthday. And you know how when you've been friends with people for 20 years, their parents become your parents. Mm-hmm. And so she's like, I'm having my 70th birthday down here. Y'all got to come. And so we came for Mama. Shout out to you, Mama Marsha Morrow. Happy 70th birthday. She retired from DPSCD as a principal. She educated our babies for almost 40 years. We love you and we honor you.
Wow. Okay.
That's big.
What about you, Khary?
I want to shout out the Turkey Grill. I want to shout out the Turkey Grill because I was able to get a turkey that will feed the family, because I was scrambling. The guy that used to always do the fried turkeys for me, he's out of the fried turkey game, and the Turkey Grill came through in classic Turkey Grill fashion. More power to them.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
I just had them for the first time.
Oh, Orlando, you slipping. You
last
slipping.
Week. Honest to God. So really? My dad was telling me about it. He was like, man, I've been going here forever. And I always passed it. And I'm like, I got to try it. So I finally tried it. I had the turkey bites. Let's just say I'm ashamed of myself.
Yeah, as you should be. I'm just joking. Shout out to two. First of all, two people. Michael Harriet for Black AF History. It is one of the best history books, if not the best history book I've ever read. It should be required reading. If you don't go to a Black African-centered school, read the book, okay? And the second is, I want to shout out Charity Dean, my girl, who stands up for what she believes in. She's fearless. She's smart. She is focused, and she gets people out. She was able to organize a tremendous amount of resistance to an ordinance, which will probably pass tomorrow, but it will not pass in its original form. Thank you, Charity, for your leadership. All right. So thank you for, okay. Thank you so much for listening. Catch the wave.